think he's stoned.
Stoned? What are you talking about?
Hey, what do you say we guys go down to the beach and shoot some clams?
We finally know the real reason Jack Soo had to quit Barney Miller. And it's heartbreaking. As Detective Nick Yemana, he made America laugh with his deadpan humor and terrible coffee. But in his final episode, his last line, "I have nothing to add," took on a tragic new meaning that nobody saw coming. Now, the truth about his sudden departure is revealed, along with the emotional tribute that broke TV history when the cast couldn't hide their tears anymore. Jack Soo's life started in a way that almost felt like a story, written just for him. Born Goro Suzuki on October 28, 1917, he didn't enter the world in a hospital or even on land. His birthplace was the Pacific Ocean, on a ship traveling between the United States and Japan. His parents, who lived in Oakland, California, had planned for him to be born in Japan, but fate had other ideas. That moment, arriving between two nations, would set the tone for his entire life. Growing up in Oakland, Soo lived in a world that didn't quite know where to place him. Anti-Asian sentiment was rising in the U.S., and being Japanese-American meant constantly navigating between two cultures. His father worked as a tailor, his mother as a dressmaker, and their life was modest but full of determination. Even in those early years, he stood out. He had a natural charm, an easy way of making people laugh, and a knack for storytelling that would later define his career. Then, World War II changed everything. After the attack on Pearl Harbor, Japanese Americans became targets of suspicion and fear. Under Executive Order 9066, Soo and his family were forcibly relocated to the Topaz War Relocation Center in Utah. Life there was harsh. The barracks were flimsy, offering little protection against Utah's brutal weather. Privacy was non-existent, and families who had once lived independent lives now found themselves prisoners in their own country. But even in the darkest times, Soo found a way to shine. Inside the camp, he became a source of entertainment and hope. He sang, performed skits, and organized shows to lift the spirits of fellow internees. His charisma turned him into a camp favorite, and people began to see him not just as another prisoner, but as a performer. It was in Topaz that he first discovered the power of humor, not just to entertain, but to survive. After the war, rebuilding wasn't easy. The prejudice that had put Japanese Americans in camps didn't disappear overnight. Despite the odds, Soo enrolled at the University of California, Berkeley, and earned a degree in English. It was a remarkable achievement at a time when opportunities for Asian Americans were still painfully limited. At night, he performed in San Francisco's Chinatown nightclubs, sharpening his skills as a comedian and singer. He was talented, but breaking into the entertainment industry was another battle entirely. In post-war America, having a Japanese name could be a career killer. Soo saw firsthand how deep anti-Japanese sentiment still ran. So he made a decision. He became Jack Soo. The name wasn't just a stage name, it was a strategy. It sounded Chinese rather than Japanese, which carried less stigma at the time. His career took off on the nightclub circuit in Cleveland, where audiences embraced him without the prejudices that might have held him back under his birth name. Unlike many comedians of his time, he didn't rely on exaggerated gestures or loud punchlines. His style was smooth and effortless, something that made him stand out. By the late 1940s and early 1950s, he was a well-known act in the nightclub circuit. In 1958, his big break came at Forbidden City, a famous San Francisco nightclub that featured Asian American performers. The club was one of the few places where Asian entertainers could take the spotlight, though many had to adopt Chinese personas to fit audience expectations. Soo was the MC, working the crowd with sharp wit and impeccable timing. One night, someone important was in the audience, Hollywood legend Gene Kelly. Kelly saw Soo's talent and knew he had something special. That night led to an opportunity that would change Soo's career forever. Kelly cast him in Flower Drum Song, a Broadway musical by Rodgers and Hammerstein. Soo started with a smaller role as Frankie Wing, but his natural charisma earned him a promotion to the lead role of Sammy Fong, a nightclub owner caught between tradition and modern American life. The musical, which opened in 1958, was groundbreaking with its predominantly Asian American cast. Soo's performance was one of the highlights. When Hollywood adapted Flower Drum Song into a film in 1961, Soo reprised his role. The movie was historic as the first major Hollywood production to feature a majority Asian American cast. It earned $10.7 million against a $4 million budget, but compared to West Side Story, which made $47.5 million, its success was overshadowed. Still, Soo's performance was widely praised. His portrayal of Sammy Fong was unlike most Asian characters in Hollywood at the time. He was confident, funny, and fully American, breaking the usual stereotypes. This role launched Soo into television and film, opening doors that had been closed to Asian American actors for decades. His television career started in 1962 with a guest appearance on the Jack Benny program. He played a tough-talking talent agent in the episode Jack Meets Japanese Agent. It was a small role, but it showed his sharp comedic timing. He had a way of making characters funny without turning them into stereotypes. That same approach helped him land more guest spots on popular shows over the years. In the 1970s, he appeared twice on MASH. His first role was in To Market, where he played Charlie Lee, a smooth-talking black market dealer who outsmarted the main characters. In his second appearance, he played a completely different character named Kwok in the episode Payday. His ability to slip into different roles so effortlessly made him a favorite for casting directors. Around the same time, he appeared on Hawaii Five-0 as Sam Kwong in the episode The One with the Gun. This role was more serious, showing that he could handle dramatic material just as well as comedy. Soo also made an appearance on The Odd Couple in 1974, playing Chok Mai Chin in the episode Oscar's Promotion. Once again, he brought humor to the role while avoiding outdated portrayals of Asian characters. But one of his biggest achievements came in 1964, when he landed a lead role in the short-lived TV series Valentine's Day. He played Rockwell Rocky Sin, a smooth and confident bookie. At the time, it was almost unheard of for an Asian American actor to be cast in a leading role on a network television show. Even though the series lasted only one season, it was a major step forward for representation. Soo's film career was just as varied. In 1967, he played Ching Ho in the musical comedy Thoroughly Modern Millie. The movie was a hit, starring Julie Andrews and Mary Tyler Moore. Soo's character, along with Bun Fu, played by Pat Morita, worked as one of Mrs. Mears's henchmen. Even though the role was comedic, Soo gave his performance charm and warmth, making the character stand out. A year later, he took on a very different role in The Green Berets, a Vietnam War film starring John Wayne. He played Colonel Kai, an officer from the Army of the Republic of Vietnam. The film was controversial for its pro-war stance, but Soo's performance added a sense of realism. It was a rare chance for him to take on a serious role in a major Hollywood film. These two movies, one a light-hearted musical, the other a gritty war drama, show just how versatile he was as an actor. Soo's talents didn't stop at acting. In 1965, he recorded a version of For Once in My Life for Motown Records. he became one of the label's first non-African American artists and was also the first male singer to record the song. His version was slow and emotional, focusing on the depth of the lyrics. But Motown executives decided not to release it. 2 years later, Stevie Wonder recorded a faster, more upbeat version that became a massive hit, reaching number 2 on both the pop and R&B charts. Though Soo's recording was shelved, it remains a fascinating piece of music history. Over the years, archival recordings have resurfaced, giving listeners a chance to hear his unique take on the song. His brief time with Motown might not have made him a music star, but it showed another side of his artistic talent. Jack Soo spent his career breaking barriers. Whether through television, film, or music, he pushed past the limits placed on Asian American performers. He had the rare ability to make audiences laugh while also making them think. Jack Soo's journey to playing Detective Nick Yemana on Barney Miller is a story of resilience, humor, and an old promise that fate never forgot. He was born Goro Suzuki in 1917, and his early years were anything but easy. During World War II, he was sent to the Topaz War Relocation Center, an internment camp for Japanese Americans in Utah. Even in confinement, he found a way to bring joy to others. He became one of the camp's most beloved entertainers, performing for fellow internees who desperately needed something to smile about. After the war, he knew his birth name could hold him back in show business. He changed it to Jack Soo, hoping it would open more doors. His career started in the Midwest, performing as a stand-up comedian in nightclubs. That was where he met Danny Arnold, another struggling comic. This was in Cleveland in the late 1940s, and Soo later joked that Arnold had the lousiest nightclub act he had ever seen. One morning in Illinois, Arnold's car broke down on a freezing road. Soo stopped to help him fix a flat tire and refused any payment. Instead, he laughed and told Arnold he would owe him for life. Arnold didn't forget. Years later, when he co-created Barney Miller, he made sure to repay that debt. He cast Soo as Nick Yemana, a role that felt like it was written just for him. From the moment Yemana appeared on screen in 1975, it was clear he was different from other Asian American characters on television. He had a dry sense of humor, a laid-back attitude, and a habit of making terrible coffee. The other detectives constantly joked about it, saying it tasted like pencils or could make someone sick on the spot. But Yemana didn't seem to care. He took it all in stride, delivering deadpan responses that made the joke even funnier. But Yemana was more than just a comic relief character. He was smart, observant, and a skilled detective. He had a gambling habit, which was a nod to Soo's own personality. And he was just as American as anyone else in the precinct. That was a big deal in the 1970s. For decades, Asian American actors were given roles that played on stereotypes. They were often portrayed as servants, martial artists, or heavily accented side characters. Soo had turned down those kinds of roles before. He wanted to play real people, not caricatures. With Yemana, he finally got that chance. Behind the scenes, Soo was just as important to the show's success as he was on screen. The cast and crew loved him for his quick wit and kindness. Hal Linden, who played Captain Barney Miller, often talked about how Soo could make a long day of filming feel easier just by being himself. His improvisational skills made some of the show's funniest moments possible. One of his most famous lines came from an unscripted joke. He said his coffee was bad enough to be used as an interrogation tool, and it became one of the most quoted lines in the series. His humor and charm made him a fan favorite, but behind the scenes, he was facing a battle no one saw coming. In 1977, during the show's 4th season, doctors told him he had esophageal cancer. He was 60 years old, and years of smoking had likely taken their toll. But instead of stepping away immediately, he chose to keep working. His character, Detective Nick Yemana, was a fan favorite, known for his deadpan humor and famously awful coffee. Even as his health declined, Soo remained dedicated to the show. As the season progressed, the effects of his illness became harder to ignore. He had to take a leave of absence during the final 5 episodes of Season 4, forcing the writers to shift focus. New characters were introduced, and familiar faces like Ron Carey's Officer Carl Levitt and Mari Gorman's Officer Roslyn LaCorey got more screen time. When Season 5 began, Soo returned, but it was clear he wasn't the same. The cancer had spread, and the weight loss was obvious. Despite everything, he managed to appear in 9 episodes before it became impossible to continue. His final episode, The Vandal, aired on November 9, 1978. By then, his illness was unmistakable. Still, he gave a performance that fans would never forget. It was the last time he'd step onto the Barney Miller set. There was something almost eerie about Soo's last line on the show. In The Vandal, his character, Nick Yemana, casually remarked, "I have nothing to add." No one knew at the time that it would be his final words on Barney Miller. But after his passing, that simple line took on a whole new meaning. It was a farewell that no one could have planned. And yet, it felt perfect. The tribute episode for Jack Soo, titled Jack Soo, a retrospective, aired on May 17, 1979, as the 5th season finale of Barney Miller. It was not like any other episode before it. This time, the cast did something that had never been done in the show's history. They stepped out of character to honor a man who had been more than just a co-star. Jack Soo had passed away earlier that year on January 11, 1979, at the age of 61. His death was a deep loss for everyone who had worked with him. And instead of writing his absence into the show with a traditional storyline, the creators made a bold choice. They dedicated an entire episode to celebrating his life and his contributions, not just as an actor, but as a friend. The episode was filmed on the same set that audiences had come to know well, the 12th precinct of the New York Police Department. But this time, it was different. There was no plot, no scripted jokes, no crime to solve. Instead, Hal Linden, Max Gale, Ron Glass, Steve Landesberg, and the rest of the cast sat together as themselves. They shared stories about Jack Soo, about the way he made them laugh on set, about his kindness, and about the effortless way he turned even the simplest lines into something special. There was no need for dramatic speeches. The sincerity in their voices was enough. Throughout the episode, they played clips of some of Soo's most memorable moments as Detective Nick Yemana. Fans had come to love Yemana for his dry humor and his quiet but sharp wit. One of the clips they showed was the famous inkblot test scene. In it, Yemana sits across from a police psychiatrist who holds up an inkblot and asks what he sees. His responses are unexpected and completely ridiculous, but he delivers them with such a straight face that it becomes one of the funniest moments in the show's history. Another scene they revisited was the hashish brownie incident. Yemana unknowingly eats a tray of brownies laced with hashish, and what follows is pure comedic gold. He starts singing and simply cannot stop. It was moments like these that reminded the audience just how talented Jack Soo was. But the tribute was not just about the laughs. It was also about the impact Soo had on television. In the 1970s, Asian American actors were often forced into roles that played on stereotypes. They were given thick accents, made to act overly serious, or placed into background roles with little to no real personality. Jack Soo refused to be part of that. He had started his career in entertainment at a time when opportunities were limited, but he never let that define him. Instead of taking parts that played into outdated ideas, he waited for roles that allowed him to be something more. Yemana was proof of that. He was not a caricature. He was a well-rounded, fully developed character who was as funny and charming as any other detective in the squad room. That was because of Jack Soo. As the episode drew to a close, the cast paid tribute to him in the most fitting way possible. They all lifted their coffee cups in his honor. It was a simple moment, but it carried so much weight. One of the longest-running jokes on Barney Miller had been Yemana's awful coffee. Every officer in the precinct had complained about it. The audience had laughed at it for years. But now, that same joke became something more. It became a symbol of the warmth and humor Jack Soo had brought to the show. Even in his final days, Soo had never lost his sense of humor. Just before going into surgery, he had joked with Hal Linden, saying, "It must have been my coffee." That was who he was, someone who could always find a reason to smile, even in the hardest moments. When the cast raised their cups in that final shot, they were not just saying goodbye to Detective Yemana. They were saying goodbye to a friend. They were saying goodbye to someone who had changed the way people saw Asian American actors on television. They were saying goodbye to a man who had made them laugh every single day. In 1945, he married Jan Stellar, a former model known for her elegance and warmth. Together, they raised 3 children, Jane, Richard, and James. Despite the demands of Hollywood, Soo always made time for his family, proving that success didn't have to come at the cost of personal connections. Even as his career took off, he remained deeply committed to his home life. His marriage to Jan lasted through decades of triumphs and challenges, from navigating Hollywood as an Asian American actor to confronting the prejudices of the time. Friends and colleagues often spoke about his dedication to his loved ones, describing him as a man who never let fame overshadow what truly mattered. His humor and kindness weren't just for the screen. They defined his relationships with those closest to him. Soo's strong sense of family was shaped by the hardships he endured early in life. During World War II, he was interned at the Topaz War Relocation Center, a painful experience forced upon Japanese Americans under Executive Order 9066. But rather than let bitterness take hold, he emerged with resilience and a spirit that would carry through his entire life. He used humor as a bridge, a way to connect with people and rise above the discrimination he faced. That same humor brought warmth to his home, making him not just a beloved actor, but a cherished husband and father. When he was diagnosed with esophageal cancer in the late 1970s, his family stood by him as he faced his toughest battle. Even in his final days, he never lost his humor or optimism. He continued cracking jokes, lifting the spirits of those around him, proving that laughter was not just part of his career, but a fundamental part of who he was. His legacy as a loving family man remains just as powerful as his impact on entertainment. Beyond his personal life, Soo was a fierce advocate for change in Hollywood. In an era when Asian actors were often relegated to stereotypical roles, he refused to play characters that were demeaning or cartoonish. He rejected exaggerated accents and submissive roles, insisting on portraying Asian Americans as fully realized individuals. His stance came at a cost. Turning down roles meant fewer opportunities. But for Soo, integrity mattered more than screen time. His role as Detective Nick Yemana on Barney Miller was a breakthrough. Unlike many Asian characters on television at the time, Yemana was not a foreign caricature. He was witty, sharp, and undeniably American. His dry humor often pointed out racial biases in a way that made audiences think, without ever feeling forced. Soo's performance was more than just entertainment. It was a quiet revolution against Hollywood's long history of misrepresentation. His efforts went beyond his own career. He spoke publicly about the need for Hollywood to change, urging the industry to move beyond outdated stereotypes. He knew that the battle for fair representation wasn't just about him. It was about paving the way for future generations of Asian American actors. Thanks to his courage, the landscape of Hollywood began to shift, even if progress was slow. What made Soo truly remarkable was how he blended humor with cultural pride. He never shied away from his heritage, but he also refused to let it define him in narrow terms. On Barney Miller, Yemana's jokes about cultural misunderstandings were always delivered with intelligence and self-respect. Soo had a way of addressing racial biases without allowing them to diminish his character's dignity. This approach came from his own life experiences. Having endured internment during the war, he understood the sting of discrimination. But instead of responding with anger, he used humor as a tool for change. His comedy was never about self-deprecation. It was about making people laugh while making them think. Even off-screen, he continued to push for better representation. He turned down roles that mocked his heritage and insisted on playing characters with depth. He didn't just want to be an actor. He wanted to change the way Asian Americans were seen in the entertainment industry. His choices set a new standard, proving that comedy could challenge stereotypes without reinforcing them. Jack Soo's legacy is one of resilience, integrity, and laughter. He showed the world that humor could be both a shield and a weapon, a way to entertain while also breaking down barriers. He remains a trailblazer, not just for Asian American actors, but for anyone who believes that representation should be authentic, respectful, and human.